1836. The King of Castrovio is dead. But his most terrible legacy is not his cruelty, nor his tyranny, it is the monstrous secret hidden beneath his silk sheets. For decades it destroyed his queens, warped his mind, and plunged a kingdom into fear. Tonight we uncover the story of the most cursed king in history, the man whose body became his downfall. Section 1. The Physician's Summons. The corridors of the royal palace in Castrovio smelled of candle wax, mildew, and death. I had walked them many times as court physician, yet that night in the summer of 1836, they felt foreign, like a place where shadows themselves carried secrets. Servants bowed as I passed, but their eyes betrayed terror. Everyone knew why I had been summoned. King Alaric IV was dead. But my work with him was not finished. The Queen Regent, Eleonora of Navarre, awaited me in the late king's private chambers. I found her draped in black silk, her face streaked with tears, her voice low yet commanding when she spoke. "Dr. Montalban, you must preserve him. All of him." Her eyes flicked not to her husband's face, still pallid, with lips curled in their final sneer, but lower, beneath the heavy velvet sheets. I froze. For I knew already what lay there. All the court physicians did. It was our unspoken burden. Alaric had ruled Castrovio for 2 decades, and though his cruelty, paranoia, and betrayals were legend, his most disturbing legacy was hidden in flesh. His grotesquely oversized, misshapen endowment, a thing both ridiculous and terrifying, was the obsession of whispered gossip, the humiliation of his wives, the source of his deepest shame, and his most perverse pride. I approached the bed. His corpse seemed to mock me, even in death. The weight beneath the sheets created an unnatural rise, obscene in its outline. My hands trembled. "Why preserve this?" I whispered, though I already feared the answer. Eleonora looked at me with haunted eyes. "Because history will deny it. Because they will lie. But I want them to know, one day, the truth of what destroyed him, and us." As I prepared my instruments, my mind drifted to the tales whispered through palace corridors. Of shattered brides, of strange contraptions crafted by artisans sworn to silence, of desperate rituals to coax an heir from a body cursed by nature itself. The organ I was about to preserve was not just flesh, it was the physical embodiment of an entire reign, swollen, deformed, and ruinous. The task before me was grotesque, yes. But so too had been the reign of Alaric IV. Section 2. The Birth of a Curse. Alaric IV was born not under a star of fortune but beneath the shadow of generations of rot. The dynasty of Castrovio had long been notorious for what they called purity of blood, though any man of medicine knew it by its darker name, inbreeding. Cousins to cousins, uncles to nieces, fathers choosing brides from among distant nieces and aunts alike. The noble family tree was no tree at all but a knot of twisted, tangled roots. On the morning of October 2, 1788, the bells of San Esteban tolled with joy as Queen Consort Isabel gave birth to her first son at El Castellar Palace. Yet in the delivery chamber, the mood was far less triumphant. The child was pallid, with a strange curvature to his limbs, his cries weak and uneven. "The gods punish us," one midwife whispered before a slap from the royal matron silenced her. From infancy, it was clear Alaric was touched by something unnatural. His head was too large for his frail body. He suffered seizures in the cradle. And when he reached adolescence, his body revealed a far stranger deformity. His member began to develop not merely large but monstrous, its proportions grotesque. Thin as a reed at its base, it swelled to an almost unbelievable girth toward the end, curving in ways no anatomy book could explain. Whispers spread through the palace. "The boy is cursed," muttered the laundresses. "It is a dragon's mark," insisted a drunken guard. The priests called it divine punishment for the sins of his forebears. The physicians, my predecessors, recorded it in cold medical Latin, yet their notes could not disguise their bewilderment. One wrote, "The prince's organ is of such bizarre form and measure that conjugal relations, when the time comes, may prove not only difficult but ruinous." Alaric himself became aware of it at 12, when a page accidentally glimpsed him bathing and burst into shocked laughter. That boy was found beaten and exiled with his family within days. From then on, Alaric moved through adolescence like a hunted animal, convinced that every smile, every bow, every whispered word was a jest at his expense. His father, King Ildefonso III, was indifferent, a man more enamored with falconry than governance. His mother Isabel, proud yet superstitious, viewed her son as both an heir and a curse. She scolded him when he slouched, when he covered himself too tightly, when he refused to meet the eyes of foreign envoys. "You must stand proud, Alaric," she hissed once during a court dinner when the boy was 14. "They must see your bloodline, not your shame." "But they see it all the same," he whispered back, trembling. "They see it even through my clothes." And in truth, many did. His deformity left visible distortions even under the finest tailored breeches. Courtiers stared, servants tittered. The boy who might have been a timid, melancholic prince grew into something darker. He learned early that to protect himself from mockery, he must wield power mercilessly. That was the seed of his tyranny, humiliation, festering into paranoia. By 17, Alaric had become cruel to servants, vindictive with tutors, and manipulative toward courtiers. But it was in the matter of marriage, duty of kings, that his deformity would shape not only his life but the fate of an entire kingdom. Section 3. The First Bride. At 19, Alaric was deemed ready for marriage. The court, desperate to strengthen ties with neighboring realms, arranged a union with Princess Serafina of Benevent, his first cousin and barely 16. She arrived at the palace all bright smiles and girlish excitement, a dove being led into the serpent's den. I have read her letters, hidden away in family archives until generations later. In them, she wrote with naive joy, "My husband is called the Desired One. They say the people adore him. I will give him sons and be his queen." But the reality of Alaric was far different from her girlish fantasy. The wedding ceremony itself was grand. Arches of white roses, choirs filling the cathedral with soaring hymns, nobles parading in silks and gold. Castrovio rejoiced, seeing in Serafina the hope of a new future. That night, however, behind locked doors, the hope became horror. Serafina's ladies-in-waiting reported that before the bridal chamber was opened, servants carried in strange contraptions. Specially padded cushions, bottles of pungent oils, and instruments that looked less like marital aids and more like surgical tools. The princess, sheltered and innocent, understood none of this. When Alaric entered, his expression was a mixture of pride and terror. He disrobed before his bride, perhaps to assert control over his shame. Serafina's screams echoed down the corridors. "Merciful God! What is that?" she cried, backing against the wall, her hands over her mouth. Her terror was so piercing that 2 guards burst into the chamber, only to be dismissed by Alaric with a snarl. Physicians, already waiting in the antechamber, were called in to calm her. Laudanum was administered. Cushions were arranged. Instructions were whispered, clinical as a medical lecture. What followed was no consummation, but a grotesque attempt at procedure. The oils did little. The cushions failed. Serafina wept through the ordeal, trembling so violently she had to be restrained by her ladies. In her diary, she would later write, "It was not a man, but a beast. I thought I should be torn apart. They made me swallow bitter medicine to quiet my nerves, but still I felt the monstrous weight of it pressing into me like iron." Afterward, Alaric stormed into the hall, his shirt bloodied, his face pale, and declared to his physicians, "You will fix this. I am king, and no king of Castrovio will be denied his heir." But the problem was not simply physical. It was psychological. Serafina recoiled at the mere sight of him, flinching if he touched her hand, shrinking when he entered a room. She began to dread the sound of his footsteps. To endure the marital summons, she relied increasingly on laudanum, slipping into a haze of stupor that left her hollow-eyed and frail. Meanwhile, Alaric interpreted her terror as treason. "She conspires against me," he muttered to his chamberlain. "Her disgust is deliberate. She wishes to shame me, to poison the line of Castrovio. I will not allow it. Thus began the cycle, the brutal attempts at intimacy, the laudanum-soaked nights, the growing paranoia, the punishments of servants for imagined betrayals. The marriage bed had become both battlefield and laboratory, and Serafina its first casualty. Section 4. The Obsessions. After the disasters of his wedding nights, King Alaric's desperation for a cure grew into a mania that consumed him. He commanded his physicians, artisans, and even foreign alchemists to devote themselves to the problem of his flesh. His words to us, I remember vividly, for they were spoken with a mix of shame and threat. "You will make me a man, or I will make you corpses." From then on, the palace laboratories became less like centers of medicine and more like places of grotesque experimentation. Every month new charlatans were smuggled through the palace gates under cover of night. Some wore the robes of Persian mystics, others the plain coats of German physicians, still others the silk turbans of self-proclaimed sages from the Orient. Each promised remedies. None succeeded. He swallowed concoctions of powdered pearls, dried crocodile flesh, and ground antlers. He bathed in infusions of rare herbs gathered from across the Mediterranean. He drank broths thick with spices and animal bile. One alchemist convinced him to fast for 40 days, consuming only a tincture of mercury and honey, claiming it would balance the humors of the royal organ. Alaric nearly poisoned himself in the process, his skin turning pale and his tongue blistered, yet still he demanded more. When potions failed, he turned to ritual. The king summoned astrologers who charted the skies, claiming his deformity was linked to misaligned stars at his birth. He ordered attempts timed with lunar eclipses, with solstices, even with the precise hour of his mother's labor years before. The bridal chamber filled with incense, and chanting as priests of dubious background promised the stars themselves would bless the royal seed. "Tonight," one mystic whispered, holding up a brass astrolabe before the trembling queen, "the heavens align with the dragon constellation. The king is favored. The womb will open." But nothing opened. Except Serafina's veins, raw from the trauma. Twice she became pregnant, and twice the pregnancies ended in grief. The first miscarriage came with a torrent of blood that left her pale and trembling, whispering, "Let me die, let me die." The second dragged on for months until her body expelled a lifeless child, malformed and stillborn. Alaric's rage afterward was terrifying. He accused his wife of witchcraft, of deliberately twisting her womb against him. He forbade her confessor from seeing her, claiming the priest was filling her head with subversion. He had her ladies interrogated, some beaten, demanding to know what poisons they had fed the queen. Yet his fury was not confined to Serafina. Craftsmen tasked with creating marital devices, padded cradles, leather supports, contraptions that looked more like instruments of torture than of love, were punished severely if their inventions failed. One was found hanged in his workshop, though whispers said Alaric's guards had staged it to silence him. Another fled the palace entirely, vanishing into the countryside. Still, Alaric's obsession deepened. He began keeping lists, pages upon pages of names, of those he suspected of mocking him. Servants who glanced too long at his silhouette. Courtiers who stifled laughter at his awkward gait. Foreign envoys who exchanged murmurs in the presence of his wife. "They think me a monster," he hissed once, pacing before me with eyes ablaze. "So I shall be one. And monsters are feared." Section 5. The Descent of Serafina. The young queen withered before our eyes. Once rosy-cheeked and full of laughter, Serafina became a phantom gliding through the corridors, her eyes dull, her frame wasting away. Laudanum was her constant companion, the phial never left her side. She drank it in drops at first, then in spoonfuls, until finally her speech slurred and her hands trembled even in daylight. Her ladies whispered prayers for her when they thought no one could hear. I, as physician, saw the bruises, the exhaustion, the pallor of a woman ground down by both body and spirit. And yet, to the king, her suffering was not tragedy but insult. "She mocks me," Alaric snarled to me one night, his face red with wine and fury. "She cries because she enjoys humiliating me. She bleeds because she wills it. A queen should bleed for heirs, not for pity. I dared not argue. His paranoia had grown so sharp it cut anyone who ventured near. Serafina's letters from this time, confiscated and hidden by palace guards, speak to her torment. In one she wrote, "I am made into an altar for his deformity. The chamber is not a bed, but a place of sacrifice. Each night they bind me, each morning I wake hollow. If this is marriage, then hell is not far different." Alaric had indeed introduced restraints. Crafted in the same workshops that produced saddles for his prize stallions, they were made of leather and silk, designed to hold her body still during their rituals. The queen, half dreaming in her laudanum stupor, endured the horror silently, her sobs muffled against the embroidered cushions. When 2 pregnancies ended in miscarriages, her mind began to unravel. She prayed incessantly, sometimes for hours without moving, her knees bruised from stone floors. At night, she awoke screaming, clutching her belly as though some phantom child still lived within her. Worse still were the accusations Alaric hurled. He claimed she poisoned herself to kill his heirs, that she whispered treason to foreign agents, that she carried in her blood the curse of revolution. One evening, I witnessed him confront her in the chapel. "You defy me even before God," he spat, seizing her by the wrist. "Your womb betrays me, your prayers mock me. Do you think heaven listens to a liar?" Her voice, thin as parchment, answered, "I think heaven pities me." The slap echoed through the chamber, startling even the guards. From that night onward, Serafina became little more than a shadow. She rarely left her chambers. She spent her days in drugged silence, her nights in trembling fear of the footsteps approaching her door. Her beauty, once a jewel of the Castrovian court, faded into goneness, her skin waxy, her lips cracked. The people of the city whispered of her disappearance from public life. Rumors of illness spread, but among the palace staff the truth was known. The queen was being destroyed, piece by piece, by her husband's curse and his cruelty. When she died at 21, the official record claimed fever and weakness of constitution. But I had seen her corpse. No fever had drained her life. She died of despair. And even in death she found no peace, for Alaric began to suspect she had been murdered, not by fate, but by conspirators within his very household. Section 6. The First Widowhood. When Serafina's body was laid out in the hall of mourning, draped in white silk and crowned with lilies, the court expected grief from the king. What they witnessed instead was something far more unnerving. Alaric stood over her bier for hours, unmoving, staring at her thin face as though it might rise again and accuse him. At times he leaned close, muttering words none dared record. Once I caught his whisper. "You betrayed me even in death, didn't you?" The courtiers bowed their heads, but their eyes flicked nervously toward one another. A widowed king was always a political prize, yet no princess of Europe would be eager to follow Serafina into the grave. Within days, Alaric demanded an autopsy. Not for knowledge or grief, but for evidence. "Cut her open," he ordered his physicians, myself among them. "Find the poison. Find the treachery." We protested gently. Her body was fragile, frail from laudanum and sickness, but he insisted. Under the cold lamplight, her belly was opened, her lungs examined, her blood drawn into vials. We found nothing beyond the ravages of addiction and exhaustion. But that was not what Alaric wanted. "You lie to me," he hissed, slamming a goblet across the table. "You are all part of it. She was murdered, and you cover it." The queen's apothecary was arrested within hours. Days later, he was found dead in his cell, his throat cut. The official record claimed suicide, but the guards whispered of royal agents carrying out justice. A letter had been seized from his quarters and brought directly to the king. No one ever saw it again. Whispers spread like wildfire. Had the apothecary poisoned the queen under orders? Or worse, had Serafina died of something too shameful to write? The palace swam in rumor, each darker than the last. But Alaric himself, he changed. In public he wore the mask of grief, pacing with bowed head, draped in mourning black. Yet behind closed doors I saw the truth. He was relieved. She failed me, he confided one night as we walked the palace gardens. His voice was soft, almost tender, but his eyes gleamed with cold satisfaction. She could not carry my heir. She mocked me with her weakness. Now she is gone, and I may begin anew. Already, his counselors sought a new bride. Envoys were dispatched to foreign courts with delicate inquiries. The requirements were clear: she must be young, fertile, and of noble blood. That Alaric's deformity had been the true obstacle was never mentioned. The blame lay squarely on Serafina, even in her grave. Meanwhile, Alaric's paranoia deepened. He dismissed servants by the dozens, convinced they had whispered slanders about the queen's death. Several vanished outright, their families left begging at the palace gates for word. Courtiers who had favored Serafina were quietly reassigned to remote provinces. In his mind, her death was not tragedy but a chess move. A peace sacrifice for the greater game. And so, while her body was lowered into the cathedral crypt, her memory already fading from the king's lips, Alaric prepared himself for a second marriage. The cycle of torment was far from finished. Section 7. The Second Marriage. 2 years after Serafina's death, the bells of Castrovio rang again, not for mourning this time, but for celebration. Alaric had secured a new bride, Princess Isolde of Montrevia, a kingdom impoverished but strategically important. At 18, Isolde was radiant, golden-haired, soft-spoken, with the innocence of one raised on tales of noble knights and virtuous queens. The wedding was a spectacle meant to wash away the memory of Serafina's demise. Banners fluttered above the city, wine flowed through the streets, choirs sang from cathedral balconies. The people cheered. Perhaps this young bride would succeed where the first had failed, giving the king his long-desired heir. But behind the silks and ceremony, the palace whispered. Servants warned one another in hushed tones. She does not know what awaits her. The bridal chamber was prepared with the same obscene ritual as before. Cushions, oils, devices that looked more suited to an infirmary than to a wedding night. I was not present, of course, but I spoke with her attendants later. Their words haunt me still. When Alaric disrobed, Isolde froze in horror. Her shriek carried down the corridor, sharp and unending. The maids tried to calm her, but she fought like a trapped bird, clawing at the door, begging to be spared. No, 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 it cannot be! That is not human! She screamed. Alaric, humiliated beyond bearing, struck her. Then, with the assistance of his physicians, the ritual began anew, restraints, cushions, and laudanum forced between her lips. The act was not consummation but violation, cold, methodical, terrifying. The next morning, the queen could not walk without aid. Her ladies whispered of torn flesh, of bruises that spread across her thighs like spilled ink. She stammered when spoken to, her once melodic voice broken into fragments. She sees me as monster, Alaric confided to me days later, pacing in his chamber, his hands trembling. But it is she who conspires against me. She flinches because she mocks me. She weeps because she wishes to weaken me. I will not be mocked again. From that moment, his paranoia transformed into cruelty. He placed spies in Isolde's household, ordering them to report on her every gesture. If she spoke too softly, he accused her of whispering treason. If she failed to smile at court, he declared she was spreading rumors of his curse. Her letters home were intercepted. Several never reached Montrevia. Attempts at intimacy became spectacles of degradation. Alaric sometimes summoned foreign physicians to observe, turning his marital chamber into a theater of grotesque science. German anatomists sketched diagrams, French surgeons murmured about structural impossibility, while the young queen lay drugged and bound, her face wet with tears. She is weak, Alaric spat after one such night. But I will break her weakness, and from her womb will come my son. The palace grew heavy with dread. Servants tiptoed through corridors, guards avoided their king's gaze, and courtiers whispered of madness. But no one dared speak openly. For Isolde, the descent had only begun. Section 8. The Shattered Queen. Queen Isolde's decline was swifter and more harrowing than Serafina's. From the very first night, she lived in a state of perpetual terror. She could not eat without trembling, could not sleep without waking in screams. Her ladies confided in me, though they begged me never to repeat their words. She startles when a door creaks, doctor. She stares into corners, whispering prayers as if to ward off demons. Sometimes she mutters in her sleep, always the same words, the beast, the beast, the beast. Her body bore the marks of her torment. I treated her often for internal tearing, for infections, for bruises and sprains from the devices Alaric forced upon her. She began to shrink in weight, her cheeks hollowing until she looked more ghost than girl. And yet, a cruel trick of nature tormented her further, phantom pregnancies. Several times she swore she felt life within her womb. Her belly swelled slightly, her breasts grew tender, and she spoke of fluttering inside her. The court rejoiced prematurely, hailing miracles and preparing for baptisms. But always, after months of anticipation, nothing came. The swell would recede, the signs vanish, leaving Isolde broken in shame. Alaric's reactions veered between euphoria and fury. At first he would stand by her bedside, eyes blazing with manic hope, stroking her hair as he whispered, "This child will redeem us, my love. This one will silence them all." Then, when the truth revealed itself, his hope curdled to rage. "You deceive me!" he thundered after the third phantom pregnancy. "You swell your belly to humiliate me before the court. You conspire with God himself to make me a fool." He struck her so violently that she collapsed unconscious. The next day, he paraded her before the council in a drugged stupor, demanding they swear to her treachery. The ministers bowed and murmured loyalty, though fear was etched deep into their faces. Isolde retreated deeper into despair. Some nights she refused to leave her chambers at all, even for Massachusetts. She spent hours scratching words into scraps of parchment, half prayers, half ravings. One fragment, smuggled out by a sympathetic maid, survives. "My womb is not mine but his prison. My body is altar. My soul flees nightly into darkness, but even there, he finds me." Meanwhile, Alaric's obsession with producing an heir grew all the more grotesque. He ordered artisans to craft restraints so complex they resembled torture racks, designed to hold Isolde in positions decreed by astrologers and mystics. He imported rare tonics said to soften the female vessel. He bathed her in concoctions of rosewater and vinegar, convinced it would make her fertile. When none of these worked, he turned his fury outward. Servants were whipped for imagined laughter. Guards were exiled for looking too long at the queen. Ministers were accused of mocking the royal bedchamber and their secret councils. The palace, once a place of glittering ceremony, became a theater of paranoia and cruelty. And Isolde? She became a husk. Her hair fell out in clumps, her voice shrank to whispers, and she flinched even at the touch of her maids. The people began to call her La Reina a Spectro, the Spectre Queen. Section 9. The Queen's End. By the winter of 1819, Queen Isolde was scarcely recognizable as the golden-haired girl who had first entered Castrovio's cathedral in silks and roses. She shuffled through the palace halls like a sleepwalker, her body gaunt, her eyes hollow, her skin pale as wax. The laudanum dulled her terrors, but it also stripped her of vitality. Her ladies whispered of her nightly sobs, muffled into pillows so that the king would not hear. Sometimes she prayed aloud, her voice quaking. "Lord, take me. Spare me this bed, spare me this life. If sin must be punished, punish me in death, only let me rest." Her end came not with ceremony, but quietly, like a candle snuffed in a draught. After yet another failed attempt at intimacy, she collapsed with a fever that worsened day by day. Her body, already frail, had no strength left to fight. I tended her bedside, and in her final lucid hours she clutched my sleeve with skeletal fingers and whispered, "Doctor, do not let him touch me again." On a cold morning in January, she passed, her lips moving in silent prayer, her eyes wide with a mixture of relief and fear, as if she were uncertain whether death itself would free her from the king's grasp. The court prepared solemn funerals, But Alaric would not allow peace even in death. He barged into the queen's chamber before her body could be dressed, shoving aside her ladies to stare at her corpse. "She was poisoned," he declared, his voice trembling with fury. "The same treachery that killed Serafina has struck again." He demanded her body be cut open, her organs examined, her blood boiled down for signs of corruption. I protested, but he silenced me with a glare that promised ruin. Under duress, we performed the autopsy. There was nothing but the ravages of fever and exhaustion. Yet Alaric insisted we lied. "Do you think me blind?" he roared. "I smell the betrayal in her flesh. She conspired with my enemies until the end." He had several of Isolde's ladies-in-waiting arrested, accusing them of slipping poison into her tonics. One confessed under torture to crimes she could not possibly have committed, and was executed publicly. The others disappeared into dungeons from which no word ever returned. But what chilled the court most was Alaric's private behavior. He had a death mask cast of Isolde's face, pale and fragile, and placed it in his private chamber alongside that of Serafina. More than once, servants reported hearing him speaking to the masks late into the night, his voice low and pleading, as though he still sought from them the children they had never borne. "The kingdom whispers," said Lord Damian, one of his counselors, to me in hushed tones. "2 wives both dead. They call him cursed. They call him unfit." He was right. Across Castrovio, the people began murmuring of divine punishment. Pamphlets smuggled in from the rebellious provinces depicted the king as a demon with a monstrous organ, devouring his brides. Revolutionaries whispered that God himself had closed the royal womb to end the dynasty. And yet, the king pressed forward. Within months, he ordered new negotiations for a third bride. His obsession for an heir had grown beyond duty. Now it was mania, the only flame left burning in his mind. Section 10. The Third Bride and the King's Fall. The court despaired when Alaric announced a third marriage. This time the unfortunate woman was Princess Maria Celestia of Aragon, a young woman already renowned for her intelligence. Unlike Serafina and Isolde, she had been forewarned by whispers that escaped Castrovio's walls. She arrived with her own physicians, her own remedies, and most tellingly, a resolve as hard as iron. Where her predecessors had met the king with innocence or terror, Maria Celestia faced him with calculation. She treated the marriage as a problem to be solved, her tone clinical even in her letters. "I am not wife but experiment. If I can endure, perhaps I will outlive him. If not, I will at least record the truth." The wedding was a muted affair. Few foreign dignitaries attended, wary of Alaric's reputation. The people, too, celebrated without joy, their cheers thin, their eyes doubtful. In the bridal chamber, Maria Celestia endured the monstrous ritual with a stoicism that unsettled even Alaric. She did not scream or weep. She simply stared at him with eyes like cold glass, unflinching, as though he were a specimen on a surgeon's table. "You will not break me," she whispered once, through clenched teeth. But her body, like those before her, could not bear the torment. Though she carefully recorded each attempt, each potion, each device in her journal, none produced the long-awaited heir. She grew weak, plagued by infections, her health declining as swiftly as the others. By 1826 she was dead, her body ravaged by fever. Alaric again insisted on autopsy, again accused treason, again demanded masks of her face. His chamber now contained 3 silent effigies, to which he muttered nightly. The court had grown tired of the spectacle. The people openly mocked him in taverns, singing verses about the beast king who slays his brides. Foreign courts refused alliances. The treasury collapsed as Alaric squandered wealth on potions, astrologers, and spies. In his final years, his paranoia became absolute. He had holes drilled into the walls of Queen Regent Eleanora's chambers, his 4th wife, chosen more for politics than hope of children, so that he might watch her every move. He accused ministers of conspiracy if they so much as corrected his speech. His food was tested by 3 separate tasters, and still he would sometimes fling meals away, screaming of poison. By 1836, his body betrayed him. Gout, fevers, and a mind worn thin by years of obsession left him bedridden. He raved in his chambers, calling out to his dead queens, accusing shadows of mocking his curse. When at last death claimed him, the palace breathed a sigh of relief. And so I, Dr. Montalban, was summoned. I cut, I preserved, I sealed away the grotesque organ that had haunted a kingdom. Even in death it defied reason, long as a forearm, thick as a hammer's head, twisted into unnatural bends. A monument to shame. The Queen Regent watched as I finished. Her voice trembled. Do not bury it. One day, let the world see what destroyed him. I placed it in a jar sealed with wax, hidden in the catacombs. And as I left the chamber, I thought of the 3 women whose lives had been crushed beneath velvet sheets, of a kingdom strangled by one man's curse, and of the ruin wrought when private deformity becomes public destiny. King Alaric IV was buried with pomp, his body adorned in cloth of gold, his face sculpted serene. But I know the truth. His reign was no golden age. It was a grotesque tragedy, carved not in marble or scripture, but in flesh. And flesh, though buried, remembers.